He thought he buried the truth forever. He thought the forest, the dirt, and the lies would swallow her whole. But secrets have a way of digging themselves out, especially when the person you fear most ends up wearing the judge's robe. 8 years ago, Sheriff Thomas Miller stood before a courtroom in handcuffs. The judge presiding over his case was Margaret Hayes, a woman he hadn't spoken to in nearly a decade. Margaret's face was stone. Her voice was steady. She looked at him the way you'd look at something rotting. "You remember her last words, Sheriff?" "Because I do." Those were the first words Margaret spoke directly to him. Miller's hands trembled against the table. His lawyer placed a hand on his shoulder, but Miller didn't move. He couldn't. Because Margaret wasn't just a judge. She was the mother of Emily Hayes, the 17-year-old girl Miller had buried in the woods behind his property. To understand how a small-town sheriff ended up in handcuffs before the mother of his victim, we need to go back. Back to when Thomas Miller was untouchable. Back to when no one would have believed he was capable of anything but kindness. Back to Willow Creek, a town where everyone knew your name and trusted the badge. Willow Creek sits nestled in the valley between two mountain ridges, population just under 4,000. It's the kind of place where you leave your doors unlocked and wave at strangers. The kind of place where the sheriff coaches Little League and attends every church fundraiser. Thomas Miller had been sheriff for 12 years when Emily Hayes came back to town. Miller was 42, married to Linda, a school counselor beloved by students and parents alike. They had 2 children, both in elementary school. Miller's reputation was spotless. He'd solved every major case that came through Willow Creek, from theft to vandalism to the occasional domestic disturbance. People felt safe because of him. Mothers trusted him with their daughters. Emily Hayes had grown up in Willow Creek but left for nearly a year after graduating high school. She'd been living with her father in another state, trying to figure out her next steps. But things hadn't worked out. She came home quieter than before, thinner, with shadows under her eyes that makeup couldn't hide. She was 17, technically still a minor, though she'd turned 18 in a few months. Her mother, Margaret, worked long hours as a paralegal at a law office 2 towns over. Money was tight. Emily needed work, and the Millers needed help. Linda Miller had recently taken on extra responsibilities at the school, and their youngest had special needs that required constant attention. Emily started babysitting for them 3 nights a week. At first, everything seemed normal. Emily would arrive at 6, help with homework, make dinner, put the kids to bed. Miller would drive her home around 9:30 because Margaret worked late and Emily didn't have a car. It was generous. It was neighborly. It was exactly what people expected from Sheriff Thomas Miller. But something shifted in those car rides home. Emily stopped talking about her plans. She stopped smiling, and Miller started taking longer routes, pulling over to talk, asking questions that had nothing to do with his children. Emily confided in him about her struggles with her father, about feeling lost, about not knowing what came next. Miller listened. He comforted. He became someone she trusted. No one noticed when the rides home stretched from 15 minutes to 40. No one questioned why Miller sometimes called Emily directly instead of going through Linda. No one suspected that trust was the first step towards something far darker. Because in a town like Willow Creek, you don't question the sheriff. On October 14th, Emily Hayes disappeared. She'd been scheduled to babysit that evening but never arrived. Linda Miller called Margaret around 7, asking if Emily was feeling all right. Margaret said Emily had left the house at 5:30, same as always. She should have been there by 6. Panic set in quickly. Emily wasn't the type to vanish without explanation. Her phone was at home, sitting on her nightstand. Her jacket was gone, but her purse remained. Margaret called the sheriff's department immediately. The deputy who answered assured her they'd start looking right away. Within an hour, Sheriff Miller himself was at Margaret's door. "I'll find her, Margaret. I promise you." Miller's voice was thick with emotion. He organized search parties, coordinated with neighboring counties, held press conferences. He stood in front of cameras with red eyes and spoke about Emily like she was his own daughter. The community rallied. Volunteers combed the woods, checked abandoned buildings, knocked on every door within a 10-mile radius. Days turned into weeks. The media coverage intensified. Missing posters with Emily's face appeared on every telephone pole and store window. Miller worked tirelessly, or so it seemed. He was always the last to leave the command center, always the first to arrive. But there were gaps. Times when deputies couldn't account for his whereabouts. Moments when he'd disappear for hours without explanation. Margaret noticed things others didn't. The way Miller avoided eye contact when she asked specific questions. The way he redirected conversations whenever someone mentioned Emily's phone records. The way his jaw tightened when a volunteer suggested searching the area near his property. She filed a formal complaint with the state police, requesting an outside investigator. She didn't trust Miller anymore, though she couldn't articulate why. Before we continue this story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because what happens next will make you question everything you thought you knew about this case. Detective Raymond Locke arrived from the State Bureau 3 weeks after Emily's disappearance. He was in his 50s, gray-haired, with the kind of face that had seen too much. He didn't smile. He didn't shake Miller's hand with warmth. He treated the sheriff the same way he'd treat any other person of interest. And that was the first sign something had shifted. Locke reviewed everything. Phone records, witness statements, search logs. He noticed patterns Miller had overlooked, or perhaps deliberately ignored. Emily's last known location was the Miller's house. Multiple neighbors had seen Miller's patrol car parked there that evening, longer than usual. One neighbor mentioned hearing raised voices around 6:30, though they couldn't identify who was speaking. "Sheriff, you knew Emily well, didn't you?" Locke asked during their first formal interview. Miller nodded. "She babysat our kids. She was a sweet girl." Locke leaned forward. "How well?" Miller's face changed. "Just as a babysitter. Nothing more." But his hands were shaking. His voice had a defensive edge that hadn't been there moments before. Locke pressed further. He asked about the car rides home, the phone calls, the hours Miller spent alone with Emily. Miller insisted it was all innocent, all explainable. But explanations that sound reasonable in your head often crumble under scrutiny. And Locke was very good at scrutiny. He requested Miller's personal phone records. Miller hesitated. Then he complied. The records showed dozens of calls between Miller and Emily over the past 4 months. Some lasted over an hour. They'd texted late at night, early in the morning, during school hours. The content was deleted, but the frequency told its own story. This wasn't a sheriff checking in on a babysitter. This was something else entirely. Miller's behavior grew erratic. He started showing up at Margaret's house unannounced, claiming he had updates on the case. But there were never real updates, just vague reassurances and hollow promises. Margaret felt watched. She'd see his patrol car parked down the street at odd hours. She'd notice him at the grocery store, always in the same aisle, always watching. Then came the nightmares. Or at least, that's what Miller told his wife. He'd wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, mumbling about dirt and voices and something he couldn't take back. Linda grew concerned. She suggested he see someone, take time off, get help. But Miller refused. He couldn't stop. He couldn't rest. Because guilt doesn't sleep. Locke noticed other things too. Miller had made several trips to a hardware store in the weeks before Emily disappeared. He'd purchased a shovel, tarps, heavy-duty trash bags, lime. The store clerk remembered because Miller had paid cash, which was unusual for someone with a government credit card. Miller claimed he was working on a landscaping project at home, but there was no evidence of any landscaping. Deputies started talking among themselves. Quiet conversations in break rooms and parking lots. Someone mentioned Emily had seemed different in the weeks before she vanished. Tired, nauseous. One deputy's wife, who worked at the local clinic, let slip that Emily had come in for a pregnancy test. Positive, 8 weeks along. She'd refused to name the father. The rumor spread quickly. If Emily was pregnant, who was responsible? Her ex-boyfriend had been out of state for 6 months. She hadn't been dating anyone else, at least not publicly. People started connecting dots they wished they hadn't. The late-night calls, the car rides, the way Miller's voice broke when he talked about her, the way he couldn't look Margaret in the eye. Margaret confronted him directly. "Was my daughter pregnant, Tom?" Miller froze. His face went pale. He stammered something about not knowing, about it being news to him, about focusing on the search. But Margaret saw through him. She saw fear. She saw shame. And she saw something else. Recognition. He'd known. He'd known before Emily disappeared. 6 months after Emily vanished, a hiker found something in the woods. It was early spring, and the snow had just melted. The hiker's dog started digging near a cluster of pine trees, about 3 miles from the Miller's property. What the dog unearthed made the hiker vomit. Bone, fabric, hair. The hiker called 911 immediately. Sheriff Miller was notified, but Locke insisted on securing the scene first. When Miller arrived, his face was ashen. He stood at the perimeter, staring at the disturbed earth. Locke watched him carefully. "You seem nervous, Sheriff." Miller snapped back. "Of course I'm nervous. This could be Emily." But Locke didn't believe him, because nervous people fidget, guilty people freeze. The excavation took 3 days. What they found confirmed everyone's worst fears. A body, partially decomposed, wrapped in tarps. Clothing scraps matched what Emily had been wearing the night she disappeared. Dental records confirmed her identity. Emily Hayes had been dead for 6 months, buried in a shallow grave less than an hour's walk from Miller's backyard. But the autopsy revealed something even more disturbing. Emily had been 8 months pregnant when she died. The fetus was far enough along that forensic experts could extract DNA. They ran it through every database available. The results came back with a partial match. Law enforcement, someone in the system, someone whose DNA was already on file. Miller's DNA was in the system. So was every deputy's. So was Locke's. But the match pointed most strongly toward Miller. Not conclusive enough for immediate arrest, but close enough to shift the entire investigation. Locke brought Miller in for formal questioning. This time, Miller brought a lawyer. This time, the questions weren't gentle. "Did you have a relationship with Emily Hayes?" "No." "Did you know she was pregnant?" "No." "Where were you the night she disappeared?" "Home with my family." "Can anyone verify that?" "My wife." But when Locke interviewed Linda again, cracks appeared. She admitted Miller had left the house that evening. She thought he'd gone to the office. He'd returned around 10, muddy, distracted, refusing to talk. Miller's world began to collapse. His colleagues stopped trusting him. His wife moved out with the kids. The town turned cold. Hate mail arrived at his office. Someone spray-painted murderer across his garage door. He couldn't go anywhere without whispers following him. And through it all, Margaret watched. She watched him unravel. She watched karma do what the law hadn't yet done. But someone else was watching too. Strange things started happening to Miller. Anonymous letters appeared at his home. Simple messages. "I know what you did." Photos of the burial site showed up on his windshield. Someone was logging into his computer remotely, leaving files open, making sure he knew they were there. Miller grew paranoid. He installed cameras. He changed his locks. He stopped sleeping. Then came the recordings. Late at night, Miller would hear crying through his baby monitor, even though his children were gone. A voice, faint but unmistakable. Emily's voice. "Help me. Please." He ripped the monitor from the wall, threw it away, but the voice continued through his phone, his car radio, even the speaker at a drive-thru. He was losing his mind, or someone wanted him to think he was. Miller confronted Locke. "Are you doing this? Are you planting evidence, stalking me, trying to break me?" Locke's response was calm. "I don't need to, Sheriff. Your conscience is doing just fine." And that was the truth. Because whether the hauntings were real or imagined, Miller's guilt was eating him alive. He couldn't escape what he'd done. 8 years before Miller's arrest, the truth was far darker than anyone had imagined. Emily had trusted him. She'd confided in him about her pregnancy, about her fear, about not knowing what to do. Miller had offered to help. He'd told her he'd support her, that they'd figure it out together. But when Emily said she wanted to keep the baby, everything changed. She'd started asking questions Miller couldn't answer. "Why do you care so much? Why are you so involved?" And then, one evening in the car, she'd looked at him differently. "It's yours, isn't it?" Miller had tried to deny it, but Emily wasn't stupid. She'd done the math. She'd remembered the night months earlier when he'd driven her home and they'd talked for hours, when talking had turned into something else, when trust had turned into betrayal. Emily said she wanted to end the arrangement. She wanted to tell her mother. She said the baby deserved to know its father, that she wouldn't lie about it, that Miller needed to take responsibility. Miller begged her to reconsider. He told her about his family, his career, his reputation. He offered her money. He offered to pay for everything if she'd just stay quiet. But Emily refused. "I'm not scared of you, Tom." That's what she said the night she disappeared. They'd argued in his driveway. His wife was out. His kids were at a friend's house. Emily had come to talk one last time, to give him a chance to do the right thing. But Miller didn't see it as a chance. He saw it as a threat. He saw his entire life crumbling because of one mistake. The argument escalated. Emily raised her voice. Miller grabbed her arm, trying to calm her down, trying to make her listen. She pulled away. She stumbled. And in that moment, Miller's instinct wasn't to catch her. It was to silence her. He didn't plan it. He didn't think. He just acted, his hands around her throat, her eyes wide with shock and betrayal, her body going limp. He thought she was dead. He panicked. He wrapped her in tarps from his garage, loaded her into his trunk, and drove to the woods. He buried her in the dark, digging frantically, covering the grave with branches and leaves. He told himself it was an accident. He told himself he had no choice. But deep down, he knew the truth. He'd killed her to protect himself. What Miller didn't know was that Emily might have still been alive when he buried her. The autopsy couldn't determine the exact cause of death, whether it was strangulation or asphyxiation from being buried. That uncertainty haunted the investigation. It haunted Margaret. And eventually, it haunted Miller most of all. But there was another twist. Someone had followed Miller that night. Someone who'd been suspicious of his relationship with Emily for weeks. Someone who'd seen him load something into his trunk and drive toward the woods. That person didn't stop him, didn't call the police. Instead, they waited. They watched. They documented. And for 8 years, they let Miller think he'd gotten away with it. Detective Locke finally revealed the truth during one of their final interviews. "I've known for years, Sheriff, but I wasn't the one tormenting you." Miller's confusion was genuine. "Then who?" Locke didn't answer directly. He simply said that guilt has many faces, and sometimes the punishment comes from within long before the law catches up. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source, a recorded confession, found on an old cassette tape in Miller's own home. His wife had discovered it while packing to leave. Miller's voice, drunk and broken, recorded years earlier. "I buried her. I buried her and the baby. God forgive me. I didn't mean for it to happen. She was going to ruin everything. I couldn't let the baby be born. I couldn't let anyone know." Linda turned the tape over to Locke immediately. It was enough for an arrest warrant. Miller was taken into custody without incident. He didn't fight. He didn't run. He simply sat in the interrogation room, head in his hands, waiting for the inevitable. And when Locke pressed play on that recording, Miller finally broke. She said she'd tell everyone. She said the baby deserved a father. "I told her I couldn't do that. I couldn't destroy my family. She didn't understand. She was so young, so stubborn. I didn't mean to kill her. I just wanted her to stop talking, to stop threatening me. But then she wasn't breathing, and I panicked. I thought if I buried her, it would all go away. I thought I could move on. But you can't move on from murder. You can't bury guilt the way you bury a body. It seeps into everything. It wakes you up at night. It follows you into every room." Miller had been living with that weight for 8 years, and it had destroyed him long before the law ever could. Margaret Hayes had spent those same 8 years fighting for answers, fighting for justice, fighting to change a system that had failed her daughter. She went back to school, earned a law degree, clerked for a judge, and eventually became one herself. She never forgot Emily. She never stopped pushing for accountability. When Miller's case came before the court, Margaret recused herself initially. But Miller's lawyer made a fatal mistake. He challenged her involvement publicly, claiming bias, accusing her of seeking revenge. The appellate court reviewed the situation and determined that Margaret had every right to oversee the proceedings. Miller had no one to blame but himself. The trial was swift. The evidence was overwhelming. Miller's own confession, the DNA match, the timeline, the burial site. His defense tried to argue temporary insanity, emotional disturbance, anything to reduce the charges. But the jury saw through it. They saw a man who'd abused his power, manipulated a young girl, and killed her to protect his secrets. Margaret presided with perfect professionalism. She didn't let emotion cloud her judgment. She followed the law to the letter. But when it came time for sentencing, she allowed herself one moment of personal reflection. "You didn't just kill my daughter, Mr. Miller. You killed her future. You killed her child's future. You killed the person I was before I lost her. And you did it all to protect a lie." The courtroom was silent. Miller's face was pale. His lawyer placed a hand on his shoulder, but Miller didn't move. Margaret continued. "The law will punish you, but I hope you understand that no sentence will ever equal what you took from this world. I hope you live long enough to feel every single day of what you've done." Miller was sentenced to life without parole, 2 counts of first-degree murder. The courtroom erupted in applause. Margaret didn't smile. She simply nodded, gathered her papers, and left the bench. Outside, reporters swarmed her. She gave a brief statement. "Justice today doesn't bring Emily back. It doesn't erase the pain. But it proves that no one is above the law, not even those we trust to enforce it." The town of Willow Creek struggled to process what had happened. How had they missed the signs? How had they trusted Miller for so long? Memorials for Emily appeared throughout town. Scholarships were created in her name. Margaret established a foundation to help families of missing persons navigate the legal system. She turned her grief into purpose. Miller's family fell apart. His wife divorced him and changed her name. His children refused to visit him in prison. His former colleagues spoke about him with disgust. Everything he'd tried to protect by killing Emily was destroyed anyway. And in prison, Miller had nothing but time to think about that irony. Years later, a journalist interviewed Margaret for a documentary about the case. She asked if Margaret had found peace. Margaret paused for a long time before answering. Peace isn't the right word. I've found purpose. I found a way to live with the loss. But every day, I think about who Emily would have become. Every day, I think about the grandchild I never got to meet. That doesn't go away. The journalist asked if Margaret believed Miller's torment, the voices and the hauntings, were real or psychological. Margaret smiled faintly. Does it matter? Either way, he suffered. Either way, he couldn't escape what he'd done. Whether it was guilt or ghosts, the result was the same. He was punished long before he ever saw the inside of a courtroom. Miller remains in prison today. He's eligible for parole in 25 years, though it's unlikely he'll ever be granted release. He spends his days in isolation, mostly by choice. Other inmates know what he did. Child killers and dirty cops aren't safe in general population. He's attacked twice, both times requiring medical attention. He survives, but barely. In rare interviews, Miller expresses remorse. He says he thinks about Emily every day. He says he wishes he could take it back. But words are easy. Actions are what define us. And Miller's actions defined him as a coward, a murderer, and a man who valued his reputation more than a young girl's life. Emily's grave sits in Willow Creek Cemetery, under a large oak tree. Margaret visits every week. She brings flowers. She talks to Emily like she's still there. She tells her about the cases she's presided over, the lives she's impacted, the changes she's made. She tells Emily that her death wasn't meaningless, that it sparked something bigger. The case changed how law enforcement handles conflicts of interest. It changed how small towns view authority figures. It proved that trust isn't enough. Accountability matters. Oversight matters. And sometimes, the people we think are protecting us are the ones we need protection from. So where does that leave us? With a town forever changed. With a mother who became a judge to ensure her daughter's death meant something. With a sheriff who thought he could bury the truth and ended up burying himself. And with a question that still lingers in Willow Creek. How many other secrets are buried in these woods? How many other powerful people have gotten away with the unthinkable? This story isn't just about one man's crime. It's about the systems that enable those crimes. It's about the blind trust we place in authority. It's about how easily power can corrupt. And it's about a mother's refusal to let her daughter be forgotten. Margaret Hayes didn't just seek justice. She became justice. Love twisted into obsession. Power twisted into corruption. And a mother's grief twisted into a lifetime of fighting for what's right. Emily Hayes was 17 years old when she died. She was pregnant. She was scared. And she trusted the wrong person. But her story didn't end in that grave. It lives on in every case Margaret presides over. It lives on in every family she helps. It lives on in the reminder that secrets, no matter how deep you bury them, eventually find their way to the surface. In Willow Creek, the past wasn't dead, just buried, waiting for the right night to rise. And when it did, it brought with it a reckoning that no one, least of all Sheriff Thomas Miller, could escape. So now we ask you, what would you have done? If you were Margaret, could you have presided over that trial? If you were Miller's wife, how would you live with knowing? And if you were Emily, would you have trusted him? Let us know in the comments. And remember, the truth doesn't stay buried forever. Eventually, it always digs itself out.